So, thank you. Today I'm going to talk about testing. I already got an introduction. I run a company called Consult Lead, and I have a blog where I try to blog about various topics, including Laravel. So, I'm going to talk about testing, and testing is something we all know is important, but still, when you look in the average code base, testing is a lot of times missing. So, why is that? Well, testing is like doing maintenance on your car. We all know you should do it, but still, if you walk around city, you see cars that can break down just about any minute. And how comes that? Well, testing is a skill. It's a skill you need to learn, you need to practice it, and you need to keep doing it before you get any better. So, why should you test? Well, who in here has ever fixed a bug they fixed before? Exactly. Another thing is, it helps you write your code faster. Take, for example, a form. When you have to create a form with validation and when you have to save it, how many times did you enter all details in the form, clicked enter, something broke, filled in the form again, clicked enter, oh, still broke, changed again, etc., etc. So there are a few misconceptions about testing. Let's go over them. It slows you down. Well, yeah, when you start out with testing, that's certainly true because you have to learn it, like PHP or Laravel, whatever. It makes your code bug-free. Well, no code is ever fully bug-free. Just ask the guys from the Boeing 737 MAX. Too soon. Okay, sorry. It only works on new projects. No, it's also doable in existing or legacy projects, but in new projects it's certainly easier. It's easy. Well, it depends on your skill level on testing. If you're good at testing, then it's pretty easy. If you start with it, no, it doesn't. TDD is required. TDD stands for test-driven development. That means you first write a test and then you write the actual code. That's also not true. When I work with new parts of Laravel I never work with, I write my code first to try out what it does and how it works before I write tests for it. And I need continuous integration. Continuous integration is a system where if you push something to GitHub or GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever, then all your tests are run every time. But that's not necessary, especially when you're starting out with testing. It's pretty fine to run it local on your machine. Now, there's loads of different kinds of testing. Wikipedia has 19 definitions of it. In Laravel, out of the box, there are 3 types: unit testing, integration testing, or feature testing. Laravel calls it feature testing, but in other systems it's called integration testing. It's basically the same. And functional testing, that's Laravel does. Let's go over them. Unit testing is basically test one method is just the smallest kind of test you can have. The integration or feature testing is basically test different components if they work together, and component is a bit loose name, but it means test if when you call this function is this API called, or when I call this is something saved to the database, stuff like that. And functional testing, that is where basically a browser is started, a headless browser, and it clicks through your website. It can open JavaScript models, closes them, stuff like that. Just execute JavaScript, for example. Now, what are the difference between unit and feature testing? Let's see. The gates are working, the doors are working, but they're not working together. So the crane is working, the sink is working, but they're not tested together. So the lock is working, the door is working. That is not working either. And the last one. So the door works, but the radiator is in the way, so you do a bug fix. You make sure it works. So what are the differences between them? Unit tests, they're fast. They don't touch the database or anything. Just an average test is within milliseconds. Continuous integration is pretty easy to set up. But it can be very limited because you can't hit the database, so it's a pretty big limit for that. But on the other hand, that can be working in your favor too. In feature tests, they can be slow because you have to run migrations, for example, which can take time. Harder setup in continuous integration, well, basically you need a database, a working database. But you can test controllers. You can execute them and see what the response is of them. But you need the database. Functional tests, they are even slower as the other two because you need to start this browser and it needs to click. And a lot of times there are timing things like you have to close this and you have to wait for the animation, so it slows down your test too. Setting up continuous integration is way harder because you need that headless browser. But you can test your front-end code, but you are not able to mock things. So, what is the goal of your test? Well, that's basically, you have to think, I'm writing this code, and what is the essence of this piece of code? That can be things like, when I call this code, a record in the database must be created, or I must get an exception because I'm doing something stupid. And it's a good thing to try to remember what that is and to focus on that, and don't try to test whatever is happening in there. You just want to test the end result. So you don't want to test that there actually is something written in the database. That's a method is called that's written to the database, but you want to test that there is a new record in the database, for example. So we have a few tools available. Mocks. That's basically you can take an object, an existing object, or you can create a complete new object, and you can form it to whatever you want. This means, well, this example is like when the method ship is called, you can let it return whatever you want. And in this way, you can make sure that your code is always functioning in the same way in your test. So, for example, when you're testing something with time that only happens between 2 a.m. 4 p.m. and you test it around midnight, then maybe your test breaks. Well, with mocks you can prevent that. The data provider, that's something I wished I've learned way before. This runs your test with different kinds of inputs. So this specific test is run 5 times. In the first run, the 8 is 16, expected is false. The second run is 21, true, etc. So you have 5 times the same test with different input parameters. Fixtures, that is to bring your database in a specific state that you require. Laravel has their factories created for that. You can create them by using artisan or just create them manually. And basically you say this is what is returned when the factory for this model is called. And then it creates a new object, or it saves it to the database and returns that object, depending on how you call it. And assertions. So you have written your test, you run your code, but how do you let the system know that your test is successful? Well, basically with assertions. There are assertions for just about anything in PHP unit, and the syntax is almost always the same. First, what you expect, then what you get from the test, and an optional message for when the test fails. So basically, almost every test is in the same order. First, you do the arrange step. That means just do anything that needs to be done before you can run your test. So create database records, create your mocks, etc. Then the X step, run the actual code that needs to be run. And then finally the assert step, test that the result is what you expected it is. And I've prepared some examples for you. Why doesn't it shut down?
Can I underbreak you for a second?
Yes. You just did.
Launch the screen capture on QuickTime.
Oh fuck. No.
No, but can we do it now?
Yep.
And just click.
So I've created an example. This is basically a website where you need to enter your aids before you can enter the website, and if you didn't do it, you always get redirected to this. So I've created also this birthday verification object, and what it does, you can feed it a date, and then it will verify if you're old enough. And let's create a test for this. So I have my data provider prepared with some dates in it. So let's check if we can do this. First, create a new instance of your test. This is basically your arrange step. So minimum age, maximum age. Let's put in the date. Can you all read the screen? No? So, this is the actual act step. Here we test the actual code. And let's see. I'm sure it's same, expected. And it's failing. No, restart. So now, not everything is succeeding right now, and that's because we need to fix the time. Because now, when you want to test edge cases in this, and you do push in dates for today, then tomorrow you test is failing again because the date is different. Luckily, we are using Carbon, so we can say the date is, I picked an easy date to calculate, and then we're done. Everything is fine now, and this is a way where you can influence the time. Carbon as this method, set test now, and then you can say it's at this moment, and every calculation it does, it's based on this base date. Another example, I have the controller over here, and what it basically does, it validates the input, and has a special rule which calls this validator again. So let's do that. And now we want to test the validation, for example. We want to make sure that when nothing is entered, we still get an error. So this is the way which Laravel provides us to call a controller, and in this case it's a post action. So pump this one. And luckily Laravel has a lot of helper methods for us, so we can say we expect that the session has an error, and this error comes from this method. This throws an exception, and Laravel knows how to read it. Oh, need to write test run. False is true. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure why it's failing now, but in normal cases this should succeed. And then finally, how to convince your manager. There's always something when I talk with people about testing. And I ask, why don't you do testing? Yeah, manager tells me not to, and I don't get time for it, and stuff like that. And I ask them, so why don't you get time for that? It's just an essential thing to do. And yeah, I want to rewrite the whole system and stuff like that. Well, no manager is ever going to give you time for that. So what I tell them, just start writing simple tests. Test that an array contains something, some very, very, very small method. Just start very small, and then just integrate it in your workflow. In the end, you're the expert to write the code, and you know what best is for your code. So if you decide that adding tests to your code will make it better, then just do it. Just add a little test, and then tomorrow add another little test, and then the day after maybe a little bit bigger test. Just continue from there. And when your manager sees that the level of your code goes up, then your manager gets convinced automatically. So I have a few links for you. Test-driven Laravel, there's a course by Adam Watten. If you want to learn testing, it's especially for Laravel. I think it's for 5.4 or something like that. Not sure, but most of the stuff is still applicable to 5.8. Of course, the Laravel docs. That's very extensive. Laravel has special methods to test things like dispatching jobs to queues or sending emails. And then last but not least, Larabene, or whatever you call it, .com. It's a Slack community in the Netherlands specific for Laravel. And you can find Bobby in there too, for example. Thank you.